I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, continuing reaction to the torrent of criticism directed at Israel for the way the IDF dealt with Palestinian riots along the Gaza border. And it's as if some sanity is being restored. The initial wave of ugly, outrageous criticism of Israel splashed across the front page of the New York Times and amplified in its editorial pages, or leading the news on American television and on multiple online news websites, mimicked in the Western media, most notably by the BBC. The criticism distorted reality so that the target, the State of Israel, was cast as the aggressor, while the assailant became the victim, the Palestinian mob, orchestrated by Hamas to breach the barbed wire barrier that separates Gaza from Israel with the express, articulated purpose of massacring Jews. None of that was part of any media story that bashed Israel. The media coverage of the Palestinian riots was morally outrageous. But in the last couple of days, voices of reason on both the right and the left have had the courage to confront the media onslaught against Israel and to put the deaths and injuries of Palestinians into context. And one must stress that any death is tragic, and a Palestinian's life is not worth any less than any other, including that of an American or an Israeli or a Jew. And Israelis are profoundly saddened by Palestinian deaths, especially when the Palestinian casualties were the result of callous manipulation by Hamas and could have been so easily avoided had Palestinians not sought to do bodily, physical harm to Israelis. And so in the New York Times, Bret Stephens writes a brilliant op-ed, and Thane Rosenbaum writes a powerful response to CNN. And in the Times of Israel, one of world Jewry's most foremost rabbinic voices, a thinker, teacher, author, leader, who's helping to shape Jewish life today, Donniel Hartman, president of the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, is also moved to write his own response to events along the Gaza border. And I'm so pleased to have on our JBS phones now from Jerusalem, Donniel Hartman. Donniel, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure to be here, Mark.
Donniel, I was very moved by your op-ed in the Times of Israel. I hope everyone watching JBS, if you haven't already, you go to the Times of Israel website and read Donniel's piece. In any case, you begin, Donniel, by explaining how you came to write the piece. I want to begin there. Tell our audience how you came to decide to write about the violence along the Gaza border.
My daughter called me. She reads my pieces and she said, "Abba, what are you writing about Gaza?" And part of her motivation came from a sense that something is going wrong. Not necessarily international media, but her feeling was that too many people are dying and there's not enough conversation. And as we continued to talk and we disagreed, I was silenced. And Gaza does that to us because Gaza is an unbelievably ambivalent reality for Israelis. On the one hand, tens of people are killed, thousands are injured. This is not something that Israel does. When you're in the midst of war and you're meeting soldiers, we understand that's part of our reality, and unfortunately, it's realistic. It's something that every one of us has seen and been a part of. There's war, but the classic war is long gone from our reality. But Gaza pushes us even further, because here you have what you feel is a war, but it's a war with a partially civilian population, not completely, because there are thousands of terrorists and Islamic Jihad and Hamas terrorists and activists interspersed. But you have here 40,000, 80,000 people who ostensibly are acting like an army because they're engaging in war against you. They're not demonstrating the reality that is their life in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
They're not demonstrating a blockade,
Yes.
which we could talk about who's at fault or not.
Mm-hmm.
Their demonstration, and each one of the days, is a demonstration against the reality and the existence of Israel. And their demonstration is not the waving of flags. Their demonstration is to create a mass column which will break through the lines in a way that Israeli forces will be overwhelmed. And hopefully their plan is that we will not shoot, so that they could break the wall, break the fence, and terrorist groups could go through and kidnap soldiers, kill civilians. I'm not guessing. This is what they said they're there to do. This is what they're declaring. So we have this quasi-army. We have a reality of war, but it's not really war because there are still tens of thousands of individuals who are clearly civilians. So we just don't know what to do with it. We know that there's something wrong, yet we know it's also not a demonstration. And Gaza forces you to a moral dilemma that you don't have in normal demonstrations or crowd control or in war. It dances on both sides. And so we look at it and we don't really know what to say. And my daughter's call to me is what motivated me. Something has to be said because we can't allow this to be articulated as an Israeli military response against the demonstration. That's simply not what it was, as you said so articulately in your introduction. We need another language. And at the same time, it's also not the same language as a normal war. Mm-hmm. And so there is a dance that there's a sophistication. Because when you just say that it's a war, people recognize you're fighting with women, children. Somebody's coming to this war holding her baby. Mm-hmm. And whether the baby was in fact killed as a result of smoke inhalation or why are you bringing the baby there in the first place. Yes. But at the end of the day, and it turns out that the baby wasn't even there, was killed. But that doesn't matter. But here, you're at a war where there's a woman with a baby. That's not a normal war. So what do we do? And so I was pushed. And we would much rather close our eyes and not deal with Gaza.
Okay.
But we have to.
Okay. You said something so interesting to me. You said you and your daughter Talia disagreed. What was her take?
Her take was there's too many people dying here, and nobody in Israeli society seems to care.
How was that different? How was that different from your take?
See, in my take, it was I saw the war dimension. I was much closer to your intro. Part of me feels, and like most Israelis, that Gaza is a hell created by the Palestinians and placed upon themselves. Part of my feeling, and most of us, is that Gaza is not on us, it's on you. We left in 2005. Now, I'm not saying that Gaza by itself could have been the future Palestinian state. But so much of the peace process over the years has tried to find triggers which would be positive. A trigger. Let's see, way will lead to way. We withdrew from Gaza. I'm not saying it was perfect, and I know we hadn't yet created a full two-state solution. But right now, there was, 1.5 million, 2 million Palestinians who had complete, not autonomy, who had complete sovereignty. Mm-hmm. They had their own port. They had access to Egypt. They had trade with Israel. They had an economic infrastructure, not full, but some, which we left behind. There were buildings. We could have expected something positive. Don't say thank you because you don't like me. That's no problem. I don't need your thank yous. Begin to create trade. We had trade with Gaza. Use the agricultural infrastructure that we left behind to create an economy. And instead, you start importing missiles. And instead of even the most positive step, you destroy anything that we created and left behind, and you destroy and burn over and again the access points between Israel and Gaza to enable trade for your own good. And so we watch this. Mm-hmm. And so over the years, it's not that when I come to look at this moment, these demonstrations, there's a history where there's a deep anger and disgust at the hatred that Gaza has produced. Now, I know every story is complicated, but some stories, because other people have a narrative, and I know fully well that nobody, it's not only about facts, but still I also have my facts. I have my narrative. It wasn't perfect, something. There was a step forward. There could have been, okay, let's take a step forward. Let's just do trade and normalization. And the ongoing wars and the attacks against Israel, and even more than that, I'm sitting right now. You have to realize, Palestinian society in Gaza has invested over $1 billion, more, possibly even two, to build tunnels into Israel. Now, do you know how many Israeli Jews are going to get killed by these tunnels? Mm-hmm. Not hundreds, not thousands, maybe 10, maybe 20. Because the minute there is one attack, the Israeli army comes in, we have total war. The civilian population is moved back, and we have complete and total war. So I'm looking at a society which is spending $1 billion to $2 billion to kill 10 Jews. Mm-hmm. And they think that's a good return on their investment. Mm-hmm. Now, all of this context sits on me. So when I come to Gaza, it's very easy for me to shut down any sense of moral responsibility to Gaza. Mm-hmm. And my daughter was calling me and saying, Abba, but there's people here. And it's not the same. It's not the same when I'm fighting Hamas against Hamas. I know Hamas against my army. I know Hamas manipulated its population. We already know, we have evidence that they push women and children forward in the fence so that, God willing, up on their perspective, people will get killed. We know this. But still, it's not the same. And so she says, Abba, you can't be silent. Mm-hmm. We have to find a more nuanced conversation. Mm-hmm. And that's what I try to articulate in my article, to find that voice.
Okay. First of all, you make that plea so eloquently. And again, I really hope everyone watching JBS right now, if you haven't read it yet, go to the Times of Israel and read Donniel's piece. Donniel, is it fair for me to say that you, the Hartman Institute in general, you're on the center left and that you remain committed to a two-state solution and that you are very empathetic of and sympathetic to the Palestinian cause in general? Is that fair for me to say?
Only half fair. The Hartman Institute has no official policy on that question. And in the Institute, just like we have people of diverse denominational affiliations, we also have diverse political affiliations. In the Institute, people have individual political positions. You are absolutely correct that is my personal political position. I call myself a pro-Zionist Palestinian, a pro-Palestinian Zionist. Yes. I believe that as the Jews have a right to sovereignty, the Palestinians have a right to sovereignty, as long as we can do so in a way that will enable mutual security and survival.
Yes.
So I'm not willing to have a Palestinian state. I want a Palestinian state. I want them to be free. They deserve it. They are a people, and I want for them what I wanted for myself. And in our tradition, what's hateful unto you, do not do unto others. I did not want for my sovereignty to be denied. I am therefore obligated to do everything that I can to foster Palestinian sovereignty, side by side with the Jewish state.
Okay.
So that's very clear.
Okay, I understand that. It's very important that our audience understand what your perspective is, and you articulated it again beautifully. And I understand why I shouldn't have lumped in the Hartman Institute. The popular notion you should understand is that the perspective you, as the president, bring in some way reflects those who would be drawn to the Institute. But I take your point that you have all positions represented in those who both teach and also study there.
I'm an Orthodox rabbi, and we have secular Jews, conservative Jews, Reform Jews, Muslims, and Christians all studying in the Hartman Institute.
Absolutely. So, okay. Your daughter is your daughter. She was brought up with the Donniel Hartman, and I forget your wife's name, I'm sorry.
Adina.
Adina, okay. So Adina and Donniel bring up their children, and their children have a perspective. When your daughter called you and urged you to write about Gaza, she did not imagine the piece you were going to write, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. If she were now here and part of this conversation, what do you hear her saying to you that you would want to respond to as you try to respond in your piece? What is it that you feel that Talia, who is a lovely, committed Jew, Israeli, from the left perspective, but she's embracing of human beings as you and as I are. And yet, she doesn't see it as you do. Donniel, why is that true?
One of the things that happens, once I wrote the piece, she said, Abba, I understand. And she started to forward it to everybody that she knows.
Good for her. Good for her.
She said, because part of what I tried to do in the piece is I tried to find a way to talk about our moral commitments. But on the one hand, give legitimacy to our Israeli experience of the story of Gaza. But to do so without taking a stance politically on one state, two state, that the love and the commitment to Jewish life, go back to your opening statement. He said, Jewish life, we're part of a tradition where life is about. So how do we talk about our value and commitment and concern about life, but not at the expense of feeling that I have to therefore denigrate the value of Jewish life, the legitimacy of my own narrative? And so she just like many of the people who you've spoken about, these were either-or conversations. So I either declare this war and a plague on all of Gaza, and I don't care, and I don't want to talk about anything, and I could go, like I wrote about in the article, and we can go on and we can dance and celebrate a victory of Israel in the Eurovision. Life is normal because it's only Gazans who are dying. That's one part. The other part is it goes too far, and that we call them demonstrators, and they're innocent civilians. The choice is Gaza is too complicated for a simple narrative. And the problem is that the narrative was too simple. And so in the article, and when she read it, she says, yes, you gave me, she says, a moral voice, a way in which I can maintain my moral conscience, my moral standards, but without necessarily having to buy into this either-or category.
Yes.
I care about my moral standards, and therefore I don't. Israel's definitely wrong.
Yes.
It's that equation is what's mediocratizing and our whole discourse around Zionism and around Israel. And the article was an attempt, as one of my colleagues says, the article was about threading the needle.
By the way, what you say is fabulous. And you mention in your piece the Midrash of God telling the Israelites at the Red Sea, while the Egyptians are drowning, you don't celebrate. Those are my children also. Now, they were trying to enslave and murder, kill, wipe out the children of Israel. And therefore, the fact that they were destroyed in the Red Sea was for a reason. But even it's for a reason, you point out in your piece, Jews don't celebrate even the death of their enemy. And I thought that was a very powerful reminder, and I'm very, very proud of what you wrote. I want to ask you to respond to the image that many American Jews have in their mind. And when you and I spoke on L'Chaim about the experiences you had when you were a soldier in the IDF, and it was painful, and you said to me there were certain things you would not discuss with me, either privately or on the air. It was either too painful or too private. But the image we have, Donniel, and I want you to speak to it as someone who's been in the IDF, is that there's a barbed wire barrier. On one side of the barbed wire barrier, on the other side, causing no immediate threat to anybody, are Palestinians who are rioting. On the other side of this barbed wire barrier are Israeli soldiers with all kinds of firepower, with lethal force at their disposal, but they're separated by this barrier. There's no perceived immediate danger to them, and yet there are times when Israeli soldiers, they're called snipers in the media, Israeli soldiers are provoked to fire either rubber bullets or live ammunition. And the question that American Jews have is, why'd they have to do that at all? Why couldn't they just stay on their side of the barbed wire fence and let the rioting, the whatever you want to call it, let them burn tires, and they're going to throw some Molotov cocktails and fly a kite. So what? That's the American Jewish perception of the reality on the ground, and therefore, in that context, it seems like there was an overreaction by Israeli soldiers if they actually fired a weapon against Palestinians on the other side of the barrier. Speak to that, please.
I wish some of the people were ever experienced these realities. We are facing a different type of war than we've ever faced before. First, the demonstrators were not staying on their side of the fence. If they were, that would have been fine. Israeli army officially states, if you want to demonstrate that you hope that Israel will disappear and that we celebrate the Nakba and you stay on your side, not a single rifle would have been shot.
Yes.
And not a single casualty on Palestinian side unless they inflicted it on themselves. The only reason for the firing is that select groups in 10 to 12 and sometimes more different places were approaching the fence, cutting the fence, and tearing it down. And you have to realize the fence is not a major barrier. It doesn't take a tremendous amount to take it apart.
Mm-hmm.
It's not very difficult. Now you have to realize, the minute the fence is taken down, you have an onslaught of 40,000 people. The minute 40,000 people go through that fence, they're facing a couple of thousand Israeli soldiers whose life will be endangered because, please remember, of those 40,000, 10, 15,000 are soldiers, armed with weapons, bombs, with a pure commitment to kidnap and murder Israeli soldiers and to reach Israeli kibbutzim and cities right nearby. The minute you have even 2,000, 5,000 people storming, you have a reality of thousands of deaths. Because the only way, here they are now literally marching into Israel, and the only way to prevent further progress will be literally mass firing. What you need to do is to make sure that there's a two-pronged move on the Palestinian side. The first is getting closer and closer to the fence without actually getting there, going back and forth, dancing back and forth, and then the sending of groups of children, protest, army people, terrorists, to cut the fence and pull it apart. It's like the case of a fire. A fire is about to engulf your house. You have to stop the fire before it touches the house. Mm-hmm. The process of self-defense, legitimate self-defense, does not require that you wait till the person actually could kill you. When there is a tent, when there is means, and A is going to lead to B is going to lead to C. And if you wait to C, you're going to have far greater civilian casualties and mass casualties on all sides. What you need to do is you have to exercise direct fire in order to ensure, number one, to stop the groups attacking the fence, tearing it apart, and then to keep the people, and in some places they were able to, but to keep the people further away from approaching the fence. That's what you need to do. Most of the people who were shot were wounded by either live weapons or by rubber bullets or by tear gas. There was a lot of wounded. That was, in essence, non-lethal response to people who were threatening. Even according to Hamas, we don't know if it's realistic or not, but at least half, if not more, of the people who were killed were direct Hamas operatives. The soldiers, this people don't know. The soldiers who were sitting there, they in fact, by the way, were snipers. And we want snipers because we don't want people who can shoot accurately. We want people who are capable of shooting to injure and not to kill when that is necessary, as cold as that is. But these people are about to overrun the border, and then there is no time for snipers anymore. Now you have to use tanks and machine guns. Snipers give you precision. Snipers enable you to shoot people in the legs, places where they will not be killed. These were highly trained snipers, about 150, protected by soldiers. Every one of these snipers, not one sniper was allowed to fire on his own. They're all his. Every one of them had either a lieutenant colonel or colonel right in their position. And it is only after getting, not from a junior officer, only after identifying a target, only after ensuring that this was an individual who was in fact either cutting the fence, moving into the fence, attacking with bombs or weapons Israeli soldiers, or instigating population to attack the fence, it is only those people who were fired upon. Now, does that mean that there weren't possibly people who were killed? Yes, there was. There was collateral killing. There always is in war. If I have a critique, and I think it is important to put on the table, it's not so much about what happened, but it's about the future. Mm-hmm. This is this story I just told you, this is a new battlefield.
Yes.
You won't see this battlefield in World War II or the Vietnam War. It's a different battlefield. It's masses of people who are willing to die in order to kill you. It's masses of people who do not distinguish between civilian casualties on your side, nor do they themselves distinguish between civilians and combatants. This is a completely different military scenario. Now, I believe that we have the right to defend ourselves. Mm. I believe that we were not defending ourselves against demonstrators. We were defending ourselves in a war zone, a different type of war zone being waged by different people. And just as Startup Nation was able to create Iron Dome, Startup Nation has to come up with non-lethal means of fighting this war. We don't pick the battlefield, but we can pick the means that we use in that battlefield. But it all depends on whether, together with your technological resources, you also still hold on to your moral foundations and bearings. And that's the challenge right now.
Donniel Hartman, kol hakavod to you. I believe, by the way, you will have started a dialogue, but your piece was sensitive. It was sensitive to the Palestinian pain. It's sensitive to Jewish pain. No Palestinian life is worth less. No Jewish life is worth less either. And you make that point. Anyway, it is always wonderful that you go out of your way to share time with me. Continue the fabulous work you're doing. And I will chase you as much as I possibly can and get you whenever I can. Thank you, Donniel.
It's always my pleasure to be with you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very, very much. The thoughts of Rabbi Donniel Hartman, president of the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. And he's written a fabulous piece in the Times of Israel. He said it all. My thanks, as always, to our director, Sloan Copeland, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.